Welcome to the Coming In for a Landing podcast on the Liberty Ballers Podcast Network. Here's your host, Paul Hudrick.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this edition of the Coming In for a Landing podcast on the Liberty Ballers Podcast Network. I am your host, Paul Hudrick, and I have a very, very special guest today, a good friend of mine. You know her from NBC Sports Philadelphia as the host of Sixers pre- and post-game live. Do we say halftime live too? Is that a thing? Do you include that?
Yeah, it's a thing. Yeah, sure.
And that would, of course, be the great Amy Fadool. Amy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh my gosh, anytime. It's always good to see you, my friend.
Well, I know you really just came on because you got to meet my little guy, Miles. That's really
Correct.
the only reason you came on is because you figured you were going to get an introduction. So,
Mm.
but I don't
honest.
blame you. I don't blame you. He's adorable. So I really don't blame
He
you.
is adorable.
Thank you. But yeah, we have plenty to talk about with the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, the trade deadline is rapidly approaching. Some good James Harden chatter, maybe a little bit of Bradley Beal chatter as well. And maybe some Tyrese Maxey stuff, which, you know, you and I have an affinity for that young man. You for obvious reasons, as you're wearing your Kentucky gear, of course. And yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the game against the Wizards, the loss. I don't want to dwell on it too much because I'm sure your view is going to be similar,
The
but
blue.
yeah, that. And it just felt like one of those nights kind of a thing. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't take too much out of it as far as, you know,
You're going to lose some games.
It's exactly 82
Exactly, you're gonna lose some games.
You're going to lose some. And it just felt, even from like the beginning, it just felt like one of those weird games where it's just like, all right, maybe it's just not their night. Joel Embiid looked mortal late in the game, which he has not looked mortal for, I don't know, 2 months. Tyrese Maxey was really the only guy that really gave them anything offensively other than Joel Embiid last night. A lot of missed shots around the rim. And then conversely, Kyle Kuzma looked like, I don't know who, he just couldn't friggin' miss. He looked like Klay Thompson last night. Everything he was throwing up. And then Harrell had a big run at the end too. So it's just, to me, it's just one of those nights. It seems like you're on the same page with that. If there's anything else you wanted to add from that game.
Yeah, no, I mean, in listening to obviously the players afterwards, Tyrese said it. He was just like, listen, we didn't have the jump out of the gates, and you know, it was just one of those games, and everybody's going to have one of those games. Even really, 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 really good teams have one of those games, and I don't want to take the shine off anything that was gleaned from the Grizzlies win because they followed it up with the Wizards. I mean, it's just like, all right, well, the win streak was going to come to an end at some point. Did it suck because it was the Wizards and it was, you know, a team that didn't have their best player? Yeah, but you expected to lose the Grizzlies game without Joel Embiid, and you expected to win that one. So if you told me that you were going to win, you know, 4 of the 5 at home, you probably would have been okay. But of course, we're in Philadelphia. We get greedy. We want to have all the nice things because we're never allowed to have the nice things. So yeah, I totally get it. It was just a bummer of a game, but I didn't take too much away from it. It was just, you know, there were some double teams that I think some teams might look at, but as far as how they played Joel, but it was just one of those, like you said, I mean, they missed a bunch of bunnies. Like, they're not going to do that every game.
And Joel didn't have it kind of from the mid-range. I think I even heard Coach Lyon talk about it last night. Like, he just didn't, you know, that game off probably threw off his rhythm a little bit. And you could see like that mid-range just wasn't going. Like, there were looks that he hits almost every single night. They just weren't going down. So just the reality of an 82 game season, ebbs and flows. It happens. I will say a bright spot. Isaiah Joe, the last 2 games has been really, really good.
Absolutely.
And so to me, the question becomes, with Furkan Korkmaz, like, it does feel like every year we do this thing where it's like, maybe we should be looking at X player instead of Furkan Korkmaz. Then he goes out and goes nuts and scores like 30 points and doesn't miss a shot for like a week. But that really hasn't happened this year. Like, it has sustained. He has been cold. So I know Isaiah is a little bit younger and a little bit more green, but to me, when I look at the fact that Isaiah is just shooting the basketball better, and the fact that he's already a better defender than Korkmaz, with all due respect to Furkan, who's really worked on that part of the game and has improved, I still think Isaiah, just from an athletic standpoint, from a movement standpoint, is already more advanced than Furkan. So, I mean, for you, Amy, when everyone gets back, because obviously, you know, Seth didn't play last night. Shake Milton is still out.
Yeah.
Furkan doesn't play. Are we at a point where maybe Isaiah Joe just needs to get a little bit of a longer look here?
Yeah, I mean, you and I know that Doc Rivers has been reticent to play younger players because
Not Doc Rivers, get out of town.
Yeah, Tyrese Maxey called and said, "What about me?" And that's just one of his things. And there's a certain MO behind it, and I get it. Obviously, you know, sometimes the young players can't handle certain situations and whatever else. But we've seen a lot more of Isaiah Joe's game. I think he was a 3-point shooter. Great. We got that. But defensively, he's got a lot more in his bag. And a couple of games ago, he had some pretty sweet dunks. So you saw that he's got some pep in his step, and he's got that, you mentioned it, the athleticism. There's one thing that this team does not have. It's athleticism and pace. You see that when they match up with like a Hornets squad or the Hawks, and you're just like, whoa, well, this team can really like go and jump out of the gym. And there's nothing wrong with the way the Sixers play. They have one guy that does that with Tyrese Maxey as far as pace goes, but that's just not their style. With Ben Simmons not at the point guard, that's not their style. Joel Embiid has got the ball in his hands. His usage rate has got to be like 70-something% at this point. But that's just a different style, and there's nothing wrong with it. But when they match up with teams that are more athletic, that do have a little bit more pace, they sometimes suffer and they have to adjust. Isaiah Joe is a guy that gives them that. And we saw how successful that second unit was last year when Maxey would come in. That second unit had a different feel than the first unit, and that's just how it was built. So you're seeing kind of the melding of the two. It would be nice if Isaiah Joe could be that guy for the second unit and come in and give them some, 20-minute games, 18, 20, 22, when they really need a little extra energy and some good defense. I mean, there was games in this home winning streak that he was playing late in the games and defending some of the better players. That to me says that Doc Rivers is giving him an actual look, rather than just like, I need somebody out there to fill until I can get my guys back out there. So I thought that was really interesting. And then you saw him early first quarter minutes, which I think those are the two telltale signs to me that, all right, they are giving him a good look and they do like him. They obviously like Charlie Brown too. Offensively, Charlie Brown doesn't give you what Isaiah Joe does. Charlie Brown gives you a lot of defense, and he knows that's his role. And I think he's fine with it. He just wants to make it in the league. I think Joe is a good player. You mentioned Furkan's just been cold like all year. He's had ebbs and flows, but this is just an ebb. He's not coming back yet. Certainly not back to where he was. And his 3-point percentage is way, way down, and without his confidence. So I hate to say at the expense of one or the other, but yeah, to me, it would be Joe right now.
Yeah. And you talk about Charlie Brown, and it's a shame he hasn't quite, because he went down to the Blue Coats, I think, for one game and hit like 5 threes. And it's like, oh man, like if he could just bring a little bit of that over, I've been blown away by how good he is. Like he is already an above average NBA defender right now. And a disruptive one too, which is not necessarily the norm for such a young guy. So if he could just bring a little bit of that offensive game that he's shown in the Blue Coats, especially from a 3-point standpoint, if he could just stand there and hit an open three, that could help him immensely in getting more minutes. And two, talking about Isaiah, like the shooting, we already knew from his time in Arkansas. The defense was really, even from last year as a rookie, I thought his defense was impressive. To me, what has kind of impressed me is that he can handle the ball a little bit more than I really thought he could. He never really did it at Arkansas. He certainly didn't do it last year as a rookie. He did it a little bit in the summer league, and some people were like, hey, he can do this. And I'm like, I don't know. I might want to pump the brakes on that. But last night in the second half, because Miles Powell, I just don't think he's in a place where he's ready to play NBA minutes as a point guard. In the second half, Isaiah Joe was kind of the de facto point guard for a minute because they didn't really have anybody. But I think he's shown that he has developed that a little bit. So that's something that I think is pretty encouraging too. Like I think the Sixers got a pretty good young player here. And I think maybe the time is now to give him a little bit of run, give him a little bit of experience, and kind of see if he can flourish in that role. You mentioned something that I kind of found interesting when you're talking about pace and, the fact that really their transition game offensively really has been non-existent without Ben Simmons, but they have a guy in Tyrese Maxey who has to be one of the fastest guys in the entire NBA. Do you think that maybe because he's young, because he's playing with so many plotting older guys, and because the team is rightfully run around Joel Embiid, who flourishes in the half court, do you think that maybe he slows down when there's opportunities to maybe push the pace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he is such a good student, meaning that when they tell him something, he really takes it to heart. So when they tell him, we need you to run it like this, or we need you to do this, I think he really works on that and really kind of just absorbs it all and tries to do that. I equate it to, sometimes you're told too much stuff and then it's all going through your head and you're just thinking, oh, I just want to do the right thing. He just needs, and we've seen it a lot more recently, where he just let it breathe. Remember when Joel was out with the COVID protocols, Maxey flourished. And then Joel came back in and was like, oh, Maxey just really took 5 steps back. then eventually started working his way back in. And now we're seeing it where they both on the court. And you're like, okay, we're seeing it in the last maybe like 5, 6, 7 games where he's really shined. It took him, probably a good month to get back to that. So I think he's still working through how to play his game in this game. I don't know that it's an exact, complete perfect marriage. I don't know what really is when you think about the game of basketball. You're putting all these pieces together and just hoping they work in some kind of way. But yeah, sometimes we talked about it before. Mark Jackson's been great on it. The amount that he defers sometimes is frustrating because he's thinking, I would guess, I don't know, get the ball to Joel. That's what everybody's thinking, honestly, when we're watching the game. Get the ball to Joel. He's your best player. Get the ball to Joel. And sometimes we saw it in that Grizzlies game for sure, but we've seen it in games where they've both shined. It's him too. The Kings game, he and Joel both showed that they can close that game, and they had to because they really. At one point it was Joel and Maxey were the only people scoring points.
Yeah, the Brooklyn game is probably the biggest example.
The Nets one, there you go.
Yeah.
He was just, and the Nets don't play with a super fast pace either. It's not like they're like running up and down the court. So I think for him, it's still a work in progress. But yeah, I think sometimes he wants to. And that's the style he ran in college. I know it was, only 1 year, but that was the style he ran. All those guys, Emmanuel Quickley, Ashton Hagans, Tyrese Maxey, they're up and down the court constantly. You look at IQ up in New York or whatever he's trying to do up there. That's the style he runs as well. He's a 3-point shooter, so he'll stop and pop. But it's interesting that he's trying to kind of adapt. But I do think it's probably in the forefront of his mind. Like sometimes I got to slow it down. Of course, he was really fast last night, so much so that Tobias didn't see him. Standing right in front of him. Whatever. He was behind him.
Well, according to the doc, that pass wasn't open. Doc said. That's what Doc said. Pass wasn't open.
I've literally watched that play on slow-mo like 5 times. It was bang bang because my immediate thing was like call timeout. I was like, well, at that point, when he's out of control, he's already turning around to pass, and you can't call a timeout there because once you think about a timeout, the ball's in Joel's hands, and no one's calling a timeout with Joel the ball in his hands. But so there was like a 1.5 second split where you could have called either a pass or a time. It was bang bang. It was frustrating. But
to me, it was either.
Maxey to me it's a pass or a timeout. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Like either you make the pass to Maxey right away, or once you cross half court, you call a timeout because they clearly didn't have the reason you run in that situation is you try to get the defense off guard.
Exactly.
If you as an
can't
offense
pass backwards
are not set up or are not ready, then that doesn't really help anything. Yeah. So
pretty sure the next practice or whatever they're gonna work on that.
And it's a shame because Tobias had been playing really well, and
he had a great
really
stretch.
Second
half
last night.
6 games, he's shooting like almost like 58%. So it was a tough one.
He just had a rough night.
To your point, like Maxey, I think his style, it's and the team's gonna need to adapt to him as well. If he's their point guard, you need to start doing some adjustments of your own.
Yeah. What's blown my mind with Maxey is, I guess not necessarily. I'm actually trying to figure out, and I guess maybe it's a question I could pose to you is like, what is more impressive or more surprising? The fact that over the last, I don't even know how many games it is at this point, he's really piled up the assists and he's really seeing the floor really well. And he's playing more like a traditional point guard at times, or the fact that he is a 40% shooter from 3. And it's not just like, oh, he's wide open. Like he's taking step backs off the dribble, off screens when people go under screen. Like it's like, what to you, like what is kind of more surprising or like more impressive? The fact that he's kind of fit into this point guard role, or the fact that he has now become like an above average 3-point shooter?
Oh, it's the 3-point shooting. To me, like he's obviously a guard. He was a combo guard in college. He was a combo guard coming out of college. He wasn't asked to run the point because that wasn't his role. That was Ashton Hagans at Kentucky in their 1 year there. He wasn't asked to shoot the 3 because that was Emmanuel. He's always been kind of like a guy that's filled whatever role you needed, and he's just been so good at that. But the 3-point shooting was the giant knock on him. That was what everybody said. That's why he fell out of the lottery. Because you looked at his skill set and you looked at the way he played in big games in college and just his overall consistency. You're thinking, this guy is definitely a lottery pick. There's just no way he falls out to 2021. It's just, there's no way. I literally remember thinking, you and I talked about it on that draft where it's like, there's no way. I'm like, Paul, I'm going to submit him as a 21st pick. And it's ridiculous. It's just because I like the kid so much. That's literally it.
I didn't even plan for him. I didn't really even like when we did, I was doing like targets And I didn't really have him because I thought I thought the Heat would be the team that would for sure. Like if he slips to the Heat, there's no way. And you know what? If he would have gone to the Heat, man, like think about how bad that would have been.
Don't even think about it. Don't want to think about it. But honestly, he knew that was a knock. He's talked about it. He's talked about how much he's worked on his game. And he shoots to improve by 10 percentage points is incredible from 1 year to the next.
Higher
Not
usage.
even a full year. Yeah,
higher usage and more attempts.
And like you said, in that Grizzlies game, one point, the defender is coming at him. He steps back and hits it. I'm like, who has that? Who had that? He had no idea. I had no idea that he had that level of his game. I mean, if you listen to Calipari, he says, "Oh yeah, I told you." I don't know that Cal knew that he had the step back three. But for him to improve 10 percentage points is just incredible. I mean, the fact that he's showing him to be a real point guard, I think, is a real nice revelation, especially the way that the Sixers season is shook out just because of their point guard situation. They can't have enough ball handlers right now because they don't have the one true point guard. Honestly, what is the one true point guard in the league anyway? I mean, it's Chris Paul, and then there's a bunch of like hybrid guys out there.
Sure.
But I mean, their point guard is on the bench, or not even on the bench. He's not even in the arena. But
he's somewhere.
For him to, he's hanging out. For him to develop that is a real nice wrinkle for them and a real bonus. But honestly, you can't have enough perimeter shooting with a guy like Joel Embiid, and the fact that he's raised his game in that level 10 percentage points. I mean, and the shot looks great. So it's not like it's some kind of flukiness and all of a sudden next year he's going to go back to 30%.
50 games.
There's just no way.
We're 51 games in, right? 51
and he
games
is
in. I mean, that's
highest minutes played.
Like, I feel pretty confident this is about right. Like he might regress a little bit here and there, but
I mean, he's going to be, I think, above league average, which is what, like 37, 36%.
Like that,
so
yeah. But and it's,
I think he's good.
You talk about that step back, and like that's something like you're talking about. He didn't have that in college. There's not that many NBA guards that like we talk about guys like James Harden, Bradley Beal. That would be such a great fit here. And even to a lesser degree, a guy like a Darius Garland, guys who can do stuff like that. Like the fact that he can do that right now at 21 years old in his second NBA season, that literally could be the difference between him being like a pretty good player and possibly a star. Like, I don't think that's crazy to say. Like
Jimmy Lynam says he's a star. He's just like, every time I see him, he's like, he's a star. And he's a star.
What about Charlie Brown? No, I'm kidding.
Charlie.
I love that only because like, my family's all from South Philly. It's like my mom says that like, she never called anybody Charlie. It's always Charlie.
Charlie and Charles. I talked to
it.
Charles the other day.
Love it. But yeah, I agree with Coach. I do.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be an absolute
he's a
star.
special player.
Yeah, and I think he has a chance to be definitely an all-star caliber player. And I'm going to bring up something that actually Brian Brennan, Sixers pre and post producer, brought up on Twitter. I thought it was a really good point when I really looked at the grand scale of the trade market and all that, and Ben Simmons and Bradley Beal and James Harden, where this all fits. But we are going to take a quick break. So more with Amy Fadool after this short break. All righty. 3, 2. All right. We are back, and we're going to talk a little bit of trade deadline because we have Ben Simmons here in Philadelphia, and he's not playing. He is in Morristown, apparently, hanging out at his house there. That's on the market, but not sold. So he's hanging out there. Sometimes he's at the Sixers practice facility. Not sure what he's doing. Or
sometimes he's at a gym in Philadelphia.
Yeah, apparently. Which to me, that seems really inefficient. Like you live in Morristown. Why don't you just go to a gym in South Jersey? That seems like Morristown's like
tried Cherry Hill.
Yeah, like Morristown's like not super close to Philly. Anyway, but yeah, we were talking a little bit about Tyrese and his progression and where he's developed and that 3-point shot and how that's kind of a guy that when you're looking at the players that the Sixers could potentially be targeting, like Maxey is developing into that skill set, but he is 21 years old. He is in his second season. So, you'd like to have perhaps a little bit more of that to supplement him. The big names out there that we hear, James Harden, possibly in the offseason, possibly now because he's not happy with the situation with the Nets. Had some really interesting comments after their loss to the Kings. If you guys didn't hear them, they're pretty inflammatory about the state of the Brooklyn Nets right now. And then, of course, Bradley Beal, his situation, and really the Wizards situation. I don't know what the hell they're doing. I don't know why you would want to keep a guy that doesn't seem like he wants to be there. It doesn't really fit the timeline of a lot of your young players, but here we are. So I mentioned Brian Brennan, what he said on Twitter, and I thought he made the best point about the idea of trading for Bradley Beal. Like, Maxey's not untouchable. I don't think really Joel Embiid's untouchable and no one else is. But I would really struggle, and I don't think I would do it if the Wizards came to me and said, okay, we'll give you Bradley Beal, but you have to give us Simmons and you have to give us Maxey. I'm telling them no. Because the point that Brian brought up was Darius Garland had basically the season that Maxey's having right now. Garland had basically the same exact season last year. And now this year, he's an all-star.
He's an all-star. Yeah.
So do you want to do that with Maxey and give up on him a year early of becoming an all-star to get, don't get me wrong. I love Bradley Beal is like one of my favorite players in the league. I think he's awesome. I think what he does scoring on all three levels, how he could play with Embiid. I think some of the actions that he runs in Washington would work really well with some of the ways that Seth Curry and Embiid are used. So I already know, I'm not even going to ask you the question because I already know you would tell Washington to go somewhere with that. But I get, what is your threshold for that? Like for Brad, like if the Wizards say, okay, we want Simmons and we want Maxey, you're going to tell them no, but like, what's your counter? What is the kind of limit you would be willing to go to bring Bradley Beal into Philadelphia?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that I also like Bradley Beal. I mean, he's such a high level player. And it's such mixed messaging down there in DC. I mean, he has previously said he does not want to go anywhere else. He wants to sign there. They are the same team that gave giant contracts to Gilbert Arenas and John Wall, who stopped playing basketball essentially a year or two after those giant contracts. I mean, there's still, John Wall got $44 million. So I think they are reluctant to kind of go down that road again. And then that's put him at a second place and being like, all right, well, what do you guys want to, like, what is your idea? Is it to build around me or is it to build the team back up? Which is like, he needs to have that conversation, or somebody does with the Wizards, because they need to pick one. You can't do both. But I think that it's one of those things that, gosh, it also goes to what the Sixers want to do. Do they want to win in the next year or two? Or do they want to build a consistent winner? That's two different kind of mantras there, because Beal gives you a great chance to win or at least get to the finals in the next year or two. Let's be honest. Like, he would just really elevate this team. You've got not only a secondary scorer, but a guy that can take a game over. He can give you 30 any given night. Sixers don't have that unless your name's Joel Embiid. Really, let's be honest. They have got Maxey is great, and he's not a 30-point scorer. It's just not him. Tobias is not Tobias. You want him to be a 20-point scorer. To have a guy on your team like Bradley Beal that can give you 30 any given night is incredible. That's what teams are made of. But at the same time, I mean, Bradley Beal isn't 21 years old. And Joel Embiid, though he wants to play for 10 more years, is not going to be playing at this level for 10 more years. That's just not, unless he turns into LeBron. That's the only person I've ever seen play at the same level for like 15 straight years, which is Chris Paul. Chris Paul, he's such a weird guy, and just not to get off, like, but it's just like you forget about him, and then all of a sudden he shows up, and whatever team he's on, they're instantly better.
He's just
by
good.
Like 30 wins. It's just incredible. So yeah, I mean, it's rarefied air. I'm not to say Joel can't play at a high level for 10 years, but an MVP level is pretty crazy. So I don't think I would include both Ben Simmons and Tyrese Maxey. I just think it's too much you're mortgaging the farm just on the off chance that you can probably win. And there's no guarantees. So I think that you can find good players out there that could fit the bill in a way that would work without you sacrificing too much of your future in Tyrese. Now, if they see that, listen, Tyrese is a great player and we really like him, but we can find another guy like Tyrese, then you make the deal, because you need to capitalize on what Joel Embiid is doing the last 2 seasons. To have another season go by, and I'm not saying you're wasting it, but it's just one of those things that you want to go ahead and take its full advantage. Everybody in that front office knows NBA championships don't grow on trees, right? You can't just like all of a sudden, I think I'd like to have one of those, and then you take it off the tree and you put it in your pocket. They're very hard to win, and you have to have a complete team, and you have to have great chemistry. They're getting there. They've got great chemistry. They've got a pretty complete team. What do they want to do? Do they want to have just the one more guy, or do they want to have a few more guys? So it'll be interesting. I mean, I love Beal. I loved him 3 years ago. I loved him last year. I certainly love him this year, even though he's not having a good season by his standards. He's still having a good season by any other standard. So I just think that he would pair very well. But I don't know that I would do it at the expense of Tyrese Maxey right now. That's not my philosophy. Now, my philosophy is like, let's build this team so it's not like a one-off and all of a sudden in 2 years you're back in the, play-in game or something like that.
I'm with you. And the other component to it is if the Wizards decide, which I mean, quite frankly, let's put this out there. Like what are both sides doing? Like, what are the Wizards doing? Like you're gonna.
I don't think the Wizards know.
That's a very good point. But like like you said, I mean, Bradley Beal's not old, but he's not young. He's 28 years old. Like he's entering post prime. He's more closer to post prime than he is just entering his prime. Like, and he's really good. He's like top. I would say what like maybe like 20ish, right? Like if you had to mark it like 15 to 20 range, best player in the league. That's not the guy who you allow to hold your franchise hostage. Like if Joel Embiid did something like this, okay, it's Joel Embiid. He might be the best player on the planet. You do what you got. Even in Portland, I don't necessarily agree with Portland doing it, but with Dame, I get it because Dame's like a borderline MVP player. Fair enough.
He's a franchise maker,
right? Like Bradley Beal is a really, really, really good player, but I don't see what Washington can do around him that can make them a championship team. Like it would just make so much more sense for Beal to come to Philly, try to win with Joel Embiid, and for Washington to get a Ben Simmons who is younger, under contract, get some picks probably in the mix. You could probably I've seen some people suggest they can dump Bertans, or dump Dinwiddie, which I'm sure they could do. They could figure. I'm sure Daryl Morey's a pretty creative fella. He could probably find a way to make all those puzzle pieces work and make it a 4-team ridiculous trade and have all that come to fruition. But yeah, I just, to me, I do not understand why the Wizards want to keep Bradley Beal past the deadline and then either have him walk in free agency or have him sign that Supermax and then like a year from now ask to get traded out like Ben Simmons.
Supermax it's like $235 million.
I know. And to me, that's why like I get it a little bit more from Bradley Beal's standpoint because like that's a lot of friggin' money. So like I get it much more from his standpoint of, I can just sign a Supermax and in like a year if things suck, I'll just ask for a trade.
Peace out.
Like what Ben Simmons is doing. It's working out pretty well for him. Well, working out well for him is probably debatable.
He's gonna find a new team.
You brought up, and it's something that's obviously like the hotly debated part of this is the idea of quote unquote wasting a season of Joel Embiid. Like, so for you, if February 10th comes and goes and Ben Simmons is not gone, Ben Simmons is still a Sixer, and maybe Daryl Morey makes another move that's like for a good rotational player, let's say that's the only deal they make. To you, is that does that fit the criteria? Like, are we at the point where that's wasting it, or do you think there could be a little bit of leeway given to Morey for at least up until the offseason to see if he actually can pull off the James Harden sign and trade or the Dame Lillard trade or what have you?
I think Joel Embiid playing at an MVP level has certainly made them kind of recalculate. I think initially when Joe was playing well, but struggled a little bit, even when he was playing well, not like MVP, but like, hey, he's a really good player. He's having a really good year and we need to get somebody else because, our superstar with 3 really good players and 2 other stars would just be huge. Let's really try to work on like getting, a really good shooter, a knockdown 3 and a 3-and-D. Let's get all these pieces. Then all of a sudden, Joel just like took it to like a different stratosphere, and you're like, whoa, like this guy is not only the MVP. And you should just give him the award now. Like it's insane what they're doing with him. I think they looked and were like, well, maybe we don't need to get all these guys. Maybe we don't need to leverage everything for another superstar to put him with Joel. So I don't want that to be fool's gold. That's my only thing. That gives me a little bit of pause of like, listen, Joel is playing at a high level. He has to play at a high level because sometimes there's no one else playing out there, it seems like. So, and that's not to say that they don't have good players, but they don't have another like guy on his level. They don't have another guy that can give you 30 points. And having a guy like Damian Lillard and a guy who I had no appreciation for until I really watched him, James Harden. Like, I don't think until I just thought he was just some clown that shot the ball all the time in OKC. I was like, this guy's ridiculous. Then he got with Houston and I was like, well, let's watch him. Oh, he's okay. So he's actually very talented. Okay. So he's just not some cowboy out there jacking up shots.
What people don't realize too with James, like, I shouldn't say, like, people that don't, like, you, to your point, people that don't watch him all the time, he's an outstanding passer. Like, he's one of the best passers in the league. He averages double-digit assists. Like, he can be just a straight point guard when he needs to be. Like, he's a excellent. Yeah,
you're seeing that with the
passer.
Nets initially when KD was obviously healthy. He was, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, can he really not average 30? He can, but he's going to average 10 assists every single, game in and game out. But yeah, I mean, I think that if they don't make a move, and I honestly, it just feels like they're not going to, and that's probably just the Philadelphia. You're just like, well, it's just how it's going to be. I think they will make something secondary, and that's just my feeling. There's nothing behind that currently. I think it could be enough. The way that the East is stacked up, you've seen some teams come back down to earth, and the Sixers have really risen through the ranks. Now, this next couple of games is really going to be a true test for them, because they've got some high-level teams that they're going up against. They're going on the road. They play very well on the road. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think that it's not going to be wasting it. And I don't know that I would have said that back at the end of December, early January. Like, if you didn't get some superstar in here, you're just going to waste the season. And I don't know that I thought that. I just don't want it to be all for naught. You know what I mean? I just don't want, I don't want to have another, I want to get past the second round. Is that so much to ask?
No, it's not. It's not.
It's been 20 years.
I feel like I don't want to say it's a waste if they don't move him. Especially, I want to give more of the benefit of the doubt if he's able to pull off some type of star trade in the offseason. To me, then it all might have been worth it if that happens. If we are back here talking in July and they just basically made a deal with the Kings and got like Harrison Barnes and Buddy Hield, that sucks. Like, quite frankly, I don't want that. That's not going to work out. But I'll say this, and to your other kind of point about, they need rebounding. They need a little bit more perimeter defense, I think, and they need some type of secondary ball handling.
Yeah,
if they can find a way to address those things without Ben Simmons trade and some other ways, and Daryl Morey gets creative with picks or young. They have good young players that teams might look at and like. They have most of their draft picks other than the 2025 one going to Oklahoma City. If you can hit some of those things with guys, you're right. The East is pretty wide open. So maybe you can sneak into the second round. And if Kyrie isn't playing for 3 or 4 games, maybe you sneak that series out. So I'm with you that I'm not going to go to the whole wasting thing. I don't think we are there.
Yeah,
but
I don't think we're there.
Yeah, Amy, I want to let you go. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you got to meet baby Miles as well.
Me too.
All right. I want to thank all of you guys for checking out the Coming In for a Landing podcast on the Liberty Ballers Podcast Network. Please download, rate, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. I am your host, Paul Hudrick, and I will talk to you next time.